lost that love and feeling that you see there with the Righteous Brothers. And for those too young for the Righteous Brothers, hopefully you're not too young for Top Gun. If you're too young for Top Gun, then you're just a kid. But it's all right. So here's the thing, though, is that this book, Song of Solomon, it has been widely acclaimed to be the most misunderstood and widely interpreted book in the entire Bible. People have more opinions about how the Song of Solomon should be understood than the book of Revelation. Many people are familiar with the book of Revelation. People see it this way, people see it that way. Song of Solomon has more different views. There are more commentaries on the Song of Solomon than any other Old Testament book, ancient commentaries specifically, because all the rabbis disagreed on how do you understand this book, the Song of Solomon. The ancient rabbis would not let young men study this book until they were married and 30 years old. And there's a reason for it. Because there's children here, I'm saving that for tonight. But this is a book that actually describes graphic intimacy between a husband and wife, between a groom and his bride. And many people, the Jews, ancient Jews, they saw this as a book that showed us, represented God's love for Israel, that covenant love between Yahweh and his chosen people. The early church fathers, quite often, it's Christ and his bride. And no matter which way it was looked at, though, anyone can open the book and you can understand it is the romancing of a bride and groom. And Christ is our groom, and we are the bride of Christ. And so we can simply look at this book and take it at that face value, that it's a romance. But Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 5 that he wants us to know that marriage is symbolic of Christ and the church, God's love for us. And so let's just dive right in to chapter 1, verse 1. I want to at least take the first 2/3 of the chapter, and then I want to look at a couple other verses. I've got a bit longer than normal today, and I'm just going to say because there's just so much good stuff in here. It was hard to hold back. And so it begins the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. I'll save some of the extra facts for tonight. We'll probably recover this, and I'll go a little quicker this morning. The Shulamite, this is the bride. She's the main character. She was a poor farm girl. And she says, "Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine." That word love there is a unique word in the Hebrew for love. It means a passionate love. It means a sensual love. It's actually in the plural in the Hebrew. Your loves are better than wine. It's your loving. It's the way you love me. It's not just the feeling he has, but the physical actions. She says in verse 3, "Because of the fragrance of your good ointments, your name is an ointment poured forth. Therefore the virgins love you. Draw me away." You see, there's all this poetry in this book. There's so much symbolism. And again, that'll be a tonight thing as we dive deeper onto that. But the idea is she's met this guy. The beginning of the book, this is where people see it different ways. But the way I've always understood and the best to understand is, here's this shepherd guy. He shows up in town. And all the girls like him. He's attractive, he's stunning, he's charming. And she's just daydreaming about this guy. "Oh, I want him to kiss me. Oh, everyone is going after this guy. Draw me away." And she says, "The king has brought me, or the daughters of Jerusalem, we will run after you. The king has brought me into his chambers." The daughters of Jerusalem says, "We will be glad and rejoice in you. We will remember your love more than wine." What this is right now is actually said, it's more of a daydream. It's not what's happening as much as it's her seeing this guy and just falling in love with him. Head over heels, this guy's amazing. Oh, that he would take me into his chambers, that he would draw me away, whisk me away and marry me. And all the girls are all excited. But then the Shulamite, she begins to reflect on herself. It says in verse 5, "I am dark, but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, dark like the tents of Kedar, lovely like the curtains of Solomon." You see, this book was written after the fact, after these events had taken place. And so some of this, I believe, is her reflecting on how she felt when she first saw him, but also how she felt about herself, but also how she felt in his eyes. You see, it says in verse 6, "Do not look upon me, because I am dark, because the sun has tanned me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept." Some wonder if this was because they were like half-brothers or step-brothers. But basically, she was put out in the field to work. She was made to work with all the guys, and she was real tan. Tan wasn't pretty in this day and age. Tan wasn't something that people wanted to do, unlike today where tan is cool, right? Queen Esther, before she was allowed to appear before the king, when she was to be made the queen, they took her for 12 months. Oiled her skin for 6 months with this stuff, then 6 months with that stuff, keeping her out of the sun so that she'd be pale and attractive. Because working folk get tan. But back then, a woman to be kept in the home, out of the sun, that was more of a prestigious and beautiful thing in their eyes. So she says, "I'm dark like the tents of Kedar." Those are Bedouin tents. They would have been made out of the black wool of the goats that the Bedouin would have kept in those parts. Yet it says, "but lovely, like the curtains of Solomon." Even though she was dark on the outside, something was lovely about this bride. Something was lovely about this girl that was desirable. And so, in verse 7, they're hitting it off. She wants to know more about this guy. There's some mystery to him. "Tell me, O you whom I love, where you feed your flock. Where's your flock? Where do you make rest at noon? For why should I be as one who veils herself by the flock of your companions?" They're hitting it off. They're beginning this courtship. They're starting to kind of date and check into each other. And so she wants to know more about him. Say, "Well, where are your flocks? Because you're a shepherd." And it's funny because he's going to kind of blow that off. He doesn't actually tell her where he's from. We're going to find out more that I believe this is actually Solomon trying to romance this girl, but he doesn't want her to know right off the bat that it's King Solomon. So he comes as a shepherd. He comes as this humble guy, and she falls in love. And instead of falling in love with the king, she falls in love with a humble shepherd. "Where are your flocks?" And he's going to tell her, "Well, if you don't know, fairest among women, just follow in the footsteps of the flock. Go out there with the sheep. You'll find my flock sooner or later. I got a flock out there. Don't worry about it." She talks about one who veils herself. She doesn't want to be, there's two theories on that, actually. One is prostitutes wore veils. You see that in Genesis. And then you also see veiling is also for mourning. So maybe just, why should I go around mourning, not knowing where to find you? But verse 8 and 9, he says, "Follow in the footsteps of the flock, feed your little goats beside the shepherd's tents. I have compared you, my love, to a filly among Pharaoh's chariots." I guess I'll get to the filly among the chariots in a second. But here's this one little nugget that's in here, and it's worthwhile. She wants to know where to find the one she loves. "Where do I find you, you whom I love?" He goes, "Go hang out with the rest of the sheep. You'll find me. Go where the sheep are." That's where we are today, you know. We're here amongst the sheep. We want to find God. We know where to go. He always seems to show up among his people. Now, this is what I find funny. Is there's all these pickup lines in this book, and none of them have worked on my wife so far. I've been trying them all week. Her hips being compared to a sack of wheat, or her nose being like the Tower of Lebanon. None of this is working on her. But back then, these were legitimate. "My filly among Pharaoh's chariots." Now, Solomon was a horse guy, and horses were prized possessions. Egyptian horses especially. Kings weren't supposed to multiply horses, specifically Egyptian ones, the real desirable ones. Now, what's interesting is that only stallions were used to pull Pharaoh's chariot. Baby, you're like a filly. You're a girl. You're a beautiful female horse. And among these, the best horses in the entire world, the best are from Egypt, and the best are going to pull the Pharaoh's chariot. Baby, you're like a Ferrari. And that means a lot to some guys. And to some girls, they should understand, if the guy says you're a Ferrari, in his own words, that means you're very valuable. I was joking earlier about, like, if you got the Lower Valley translation, like, baby, you're like a B-20 VTEC EG hatch. You look good. Honda talk. One person's going to understand that, and they're going to be thankful I said it. Everyone else is wondering what I'm talking about. I taught shop class. We taught cars. But he's complimenting her now. This is him approaching her. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, verse 10. Your neck with chains of gold. We will make you ornaments of gold with studs of silver. This is where translations get weird, because it says the daughters of Jerusalem in my Bible. That's added. If you read the Song of Solomon, it is important to know her beloved, to her, the Shulamite. That's all added by Bible writers to try and help you understand who's talking. Problem is a lot of scholars argue, well, who really is talking here? What I would say, and what many say, is that this is still Solomon, the shepherd, talking to her. It's in the plural. Could that hint at the Trinity? Even like in the book of Genesis, let us make man in our own image. When God is speaking, the person represents God. Because he compliments her neck and like a necklace. So it says, we're going to make you ornaments and silver. Baby, I'm going to buy you jewelry. You see the loving and the sweet talking that's going on? Honey, I'm going to buy you some jewelry. I wanted to get to at least verse 12. We're only talking about the romance to start setting the scene. But there's this beautiful romance. They're going to have courtship. We're going to watch him whisk her away on a chariot. We're going to see their wedding night in chapter 4. It's this beautiful romance of intimate romantic love between a bride and her groom. But verse 12, it jumped out at me. While the king is at his table, my spikenard sends forth its fragrance. While the king is at his table, my spikenard sends forth its fragrance. The Song of Solomon was read on the 8th day of Passover. Every Jew would hear this book read every year at one of their most prized celebrations on the 8th day to close it off. While the king is at his table, my spikenard sends forth its fragrance. After Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead there at Bethany, he goes to dinner with Lazarus and his two sisters, Mary and Martha. It's there at the table that Mary takes a flask of spikenard. Now, if you know that story, you should know this is a $40,000 bottle of perfume. Just making sure we're all together here. 40 grand. They were these little vials, crafted with a crooked neck, so it could hang on a necklace, but the only way to open it is to snap the top of that thing off. She pours it on Jesus' feet. She wipes it in using her long hair. People protest. He's like, no, she's anointing me for my burial. Something clicked inside of Mary. The word of God was hidden in her heart. And I just wonder if at dinner that one day, all Mary could hear in her head, while the king is at the table, my spikenard sends forth its fragrance. It was supposed to be something that typically women would have as a dowry for their own wedding. But she saw it more fit for Jesus. I didn't say it earlier, but many scholars, I've got a great Spurgeon quote I'm going to do tonight. They talk about how this book, to the average person, you see the erotic intimacy in the book. It's pretty straightforward when you understand the words. But to the believer, it can mean more. And people like Spurgeon, D.L. Moody, St. John of the Cross, John Gill, other great names, this was their favorite book of the Bible. Spurgeon says this is the Holy of Holies. And he goes, and many believers, they've approached the temple. They may have made it in the court. But maybe God has not opened their eyes enough. They've never experienced that near and dear, physical, personal, intimate relationship with Jesus to where this book would actually make sense. I'll be honest, I've read this book a few times. It's never made sense like it did this week. the intimacy that God desires with us, how close He wants to be with us. I want to look at just two more things. I wanted to paint a picture of the love that they had. And I'm cutting it short. There's so much more of this beautiful romance between the beloved and the Shulamite. A romance similar that God would desire to have with us. But often we lose that loving feeling. Many people account it to maturity. Well, I got more mature in my faith, and I'm just not that zealous believer I once was. But God says, no, I want to grow in love with you over the years. I want the intensity of my love with you to grow deeper and more beautiful and more passionate. He wants the same for your marriage. You see, in chapter 2, in the next scene, he keeps asking her to come away. You see it in chapter 2, verse 10, verse 13. Rise up, my love, my fair one. Come away. Let's go. Let's do something. Her response is she ends up just saying, no, I just want to be here with you. Let's just lay together. And he goes, no. He says it again. Let's go. Let's go out and do something together as a couple. No, I just want to enjoy being with you, babe. And what happens in chapter 3, verse 1? By night on my bed I sought the one I love. I sought him and did not find him. I will rise now and go about the city. He leaves. He wanted to go out with her, and he leaves. You see, there are two great bodies of water in the Holy Land, both fed by the exact same river. The Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is a symbol of life. It's the one place in the world you can go get fresh tilapia, naturally growing. That's where they swim. That's where they're from. They're farmed everywhere, but that's where you can go get the real deal. Tons of fish, tons of life. Water, it waters the whole land. That's where their main source of water is. And then there's this Dead Sea. I don't probably have to paint a picture of that, right? Because it's the Dead Sea for a reason. Nothing lives in it. They're both fed by the same river. Why is one life and the other death? You see, the Sea of Galilee, it gets poured into and it continues to pour out. The Dead Sea has an entrance and there is no exit. We as believers should know we can sit and get filled, and it's wonderful and it's romantic. You might hit a point in your walk where the feeling goes away and all of a sudden you don't feel like there's anything anymore. Why? Well, sometimes it's because God wants to pour into you so you can pour out into others. So you can pour out into your workplace. So that you can pour out into the church body. And when we sit and we get, and we sit and we get, but we never pour out, all of a sudden we lose that feeling. Something happens. I'm still being well fed, but I lost the feeling. He kept saying, come away, let's go. Come away with me, my love, my fair one, my darling, let's go. And she says, no, I just want to stay here in the cleft of the rock. You're so beautiful. Let me just lay and look at your face. So what happens? She hits the streets. She starts looking for him. Verse 3, it says, the watchmen who go about the city found me. And I said, have you seen the one I love? She realizes he's gone, so she's searching. Verse 4, let's read the first half. Scarcely had I passed by them when I found the one I love. I held him and would not let him go. So often, the one we love, he goes because we let him go. It's a weird thing about God. It's a weird thing about Jesus that he'll never leave you nor forsake you. He's never kicking you out. He's never going somewhere where you can't find him. Yet throughout the Bible, there are all these stories and pictures where he makes it clear that he's not going to wait forever to do the work he desires to do in you. 3 stories. Genesis 32. Jacob's on the way back. He picked up his 2 brides. He's about to meet with his brother again for the first time. The reason he fled, he's a little afraid. He spends the night in prayer. down there at Penuel by the river Jabbok. He's getting ready to cross, and he wrestles with God. It's that story where he has a wrestling match with God. And maybe some of you have felt like you've been wrestling with God lately. You realize I'm in a wrestling match, and God continues to fight with me, and I'm just fighting back. We talked last week about kicking against the goads, right? Kicking back when God's trying to get your attention. What happens? God gets tired. I'm done with you. I'm done wrestling. Jacob, I'm leaving. Jacob says, no, you can't go. And so they're wrestling. And he's like, no, I'm leaving. No. So God goes and whoop, pops him in the hip, dislocates his hip. Jacob will walk the rest of his life with a limp. But Jacob doesn't let go. I'm leaving now. Jacob says, no. I'm leaving. It says Jacob's falling at this point, right? He's got a dislocated hip. He's hanging on to God as all of his might. Until finally Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And I think that's what he wanted the whole time, was to stop wrestling and just let him bless him. It's like, man, Jacob, all I wanted to do is bless you. And all you want to do is fight with me. I'm trying to get you to do something. You're just fighting back. I broke your hip. Have I got the message across yet? And as he's laying there, I'm just imagining this on the ground, clinging to the leg of Jesus. He looks him in the eyes and says, what's your name? He looks back, Yaakov, Jacob, heel catcher. Can you imagine saying that as you're hanging on God's leg? You're in a wrestling match with Jesus. Well, no longer are you Jacob. I was trying to get through to you, and I think I finally got your attention. You shall be Israel. Changes his name, changes his walk for the rest of his life. God got through from that wrestling match. But the thing was, he was ready to leave. If Jacob hadn't fought to the end and stayed there holding on, just like we see the Shulamite, I held him and would not let go. Well, that's the Old Testament. We see the same thing in the New. Much shorter, right? Mark chapter 6. Jesus feeds the multitude. He tells the 12, what? Get in the boat, sail off. They start rowing. They're rowing for hours. These are skilled fishermen. They do this their whole lives. And they're freaking out. They're only halfway across the lake. They should have been across the lake by now. And they're rowing, and they're rowing, and they're rowing. They're facing a storm. Ironically, they're exactly where God told them to be, right? They're not in disobedience, but they're definitely in a storm. They weren't rebelling, but they're experiencing something. They had already gone through Storm 101 with Jesus asleep in the boat. Storm 102, right? God teaches you a lesson. Now he takes you to the next lesson. Jesus isn't in the boat. Here's the part that gets me. Mark 6:48. It says, Jesus implied, or as it acted as if he would have passed them by. That's the only gospel that catches that line in Mark. He's walking on the water, and he's like, I would have just passed right on by. But they invited him into the boat. Crucifixion, resurrection. Luke 24, road to Emmaus. 2 disciples are broken because their Lord had been crucified. Jesus shows up. They don't recognize him. He begins to unfold the scriptures to them. Why are you so down, guys? Why are you so sad? Don't you know? Where have you been? Have you not been here? The Lord's been crucified. It says he begins to unfold, beginning with the law of Moses. He explains the prophets, and he goes into the Psalms. For those who are Jewish, they would understand the Torah, the prophets are the Nevi'im, and the poetical books, the writings, are the Ketuvim. A Jewish Bible is called a Tanakh. Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Those 3 parts combined. That's a Jewish Bible. He takes them through the whole Bible, basically. Up until that point, he walks them through the scriptures. Their hearts burned within them. They had an experience. They were getting good teaching, a supernatural experience, and yet, it says Jesus would have passed on. They get to the town they were going to. Jesus says, I'm going to keep walking. But they stopped him. They said, Jesus, come dine with us. And then he broke bread, had communion with them, and they realized who it was they had been walking with this whole time. Many of us are familiar with Revelation 3:20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if anyone hears my voice, I will come into them, I will dine with them, and them with me. We need to remember that although this is a popular and good verse for evangelism, it was written to Christians. It was written to a church. Not unbelievers. That I'm standing at the door and I'm knocking, trying to get your attention, saying, let me in. He wrote that to a church. He wrote that to Christians. How do you fix this? What do we do when we realize Jesus had been knocking and maybe I didn't let him in? And he may have passed by. Doesn't mean he's gone. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Churchill speaks of the day, the tragedy of if that great day which had been prepared for us beforehand comes and it finds us either unwilling, unprepared, or unqualified, and we miss what would have been our greatest moment. God tries to get our attention. I do wonder how often we listen. Chapter 5 of Song of Solomon is the answer. Well, it begins the answer, because guess what happens? Chapter 4 really ends in like verse 1. And guess what happens? Is this familiar? I sleep, but my heart is awake. 5:2. It's the voice of my beloved. He knocks, saying, open for me, my sister, my love, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is covered with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night. We'll learn a little bit tonight more about, he doesn't call her a bride anymore, my love. It is actually later in their marriage. Marriage has gone on for a while. Some of us have been married long enough that you know that like the first few months are sometimes different than the second and third decade, or even the second and third year for that matter. So he's knocking at the door. He wants to come in. You see, the princess, or the queen, I guess it's a queen, she had her own room. She's not sleeping in the same bed with him every night. So he's coming to her room. Hey, babe, let me in. He wants some attention. He's knocking. He's talking sweet. What does she say in verse 3? I've taken off my robe. How can I put it on again? I've washed my feet. How can I defile them? My beloved is hands at the door, by the latch of the door. And then my heart yearned for him. So I arose for my beloved. My hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the lock. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and was gone. He tried to make an advance. She had a couple of excuses. She wasn't in the mood. Again, we try and keep our morning ones more PG as best we can. But that's what it is. He's knocking at the door. Hey, babe, can I come in? He desired intimacy. Just like Jesus stands at the door. He knocks. And he wants more than just a passing hello. He wants some intimacy with us. She gives excuses. Lord, it's too early to get up and be with you. I worked hard this week. I'm tired. I'm not in the mood, Lord, to be with you right now. So often we might give the Lord the same excuses of why we just don't feel like being intimate today or tomorrow. And so he leaves. When she finally gets up and goes looking for him, the rest of chapter 5 is her searching the town. The watchmen abuse her, are mean to her. She finds these girls. They mock her. Finally, they're like, well, what's so big about your guy anyway? So she starts just raving about him. And then finally, it all clicks in chapter 6, verses 2 and 3. We're going to wrap up our text right there. Finally, it clicks. My beloved has gone to his garden, to the bed of spices, to feed his flocks in the gardens, and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved's is mine. He feeds his flock among the lilies. I don't know if it's clicked, but you see, that's where they met. She realized When he had left and departed, she doesn't know where to find him. Where do I find God when all of a sudden the feeling isn't there anymore? Where do I find God when, man, Lord, I used to have amazing times with you, but lately it's been kind of dry. It hit her. He's back where we first met. He's doing the things we first did. Does this sound awfully familiar to someone? I quoted out of the 7th letter that Jesus wrote in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 3. In that first letter, he starts off raving about this amazing church. Maybe it's like an amazing Christian. Oh, Ephesus, I know your works, man. You guys are good. You teach the Bible. You guys pray. You always tithe. You call out the heretics. You call out the teachers and the preachers who are doing a bad job. You guys are an A-plus church. You're an A-plus Christian. But I have this against you. You've lost your love for me. You've lost the love. And I don't care that you have all the works. I want to be intimate with you. I want to be near to you. I want love, not just works. So what does he tell them to do? Repent. Go back and do the first works. Not even thinking about this text, not having a clue I would quote it this morning. Earlier this week, I was thinking about those verses and just how it's been so fun being out sharing outside of Safeway, holding up those signs, doing evangelism. Why? You know how many young believers, new believers, you're new to the faith, they just want to tell everyone about Jesus. Something about going back and doing the works I did when I was in college and I was new and zealous, it's given me a little extra fire and a little extra oomph. It's been fun. I've had joy. Because I went back and started acting like a new believer again. I started getting crazy for Jesus. When she realizes where he is, I need to go back. I need to get back to the way I was when I was a new believer and I was zealous and we were passionate. We were in love. I never would have turned away his advances back then. And what happens when she goes back? She doesn't get a "where were you? Why didn't you open for me?" He doesn't start quoting her 1 Corinthians 7 and taking her through the word and all. It's chapter 6, verse 4, the next verse in Song of Solomon. She finds him and he says, "Oh, my love, you're as beautiful as Tirzah, lovely as Jerusalem, as awesome or formidable as an army with banners. Turn away your eyes from me, for they overcome me." I'm going to stop before he gets her hair being like a flock of goats. We'll save that for later. Tirzah, when the nation divides, becomes the capital of the north. Tirzah. Keep saying it backwards. Tirzah. It's a beautiful city on the north. Jerusalem, the crown city down below. You're as awesome or terrible, as the old King James says, but it's formidable. What he tells her is, baby, you are as formidable as an army when you look at me. That's what he's telling her if you go to the next verse. It's only used twice in Song of Solomon, once in Habakkuk when God's talking about how formidable the Babylonians are going to be when they come in and wipe them out. A formidable army that no one can stand against. He says, honey, when you look at me, you're like an army that no one can stop. He says, turn your eyes away from me, because when you look at me, you drive me crazy for you. But remember, that's God talking to you. And it blows my mind. I know how much he loves me, but to even think that my love means so much to him, that's hard to fathom. The idea that the Lord of all creation would ever want to woo me, would ever want to call out to me. And when I reject him at his advances, when I come to my senses, he's just right back there with the compliments and saying how much he loves me. God desires intimacy with you. He desires something more than just going through the motions of marriage. He wants to see passion, romance, love, and desire, as he would love to see between a bride and groom. We'll get more into the actual marital stuff tonight, but that's God's desire for marriages too. Marriage is always supposed to be a picture of Christ and his bride. And so too, he would love for our marriages and our families to grow in passion and love Lord willing. It's just that one thing that always gets in the way. That's sin. My sin. My wife's sin. Your sin. Your spouse's sin. But His love for us is perfect. His love for us is perfect. And He desires intimacy with you today. 2 people are being baptized today because they decided to make that initial proclamation of faith. I will say this. I personally see nothing wrong. If you feel like you want to join in on the baptisms today because maybe you realize that there's some extra intimacy that God's demanding, that God desires, that He wants from you, and you want to rededicate your life to a life of intimacy and not just going through the motions of a relationship, join us. We'll do it right after the service. We're only going to do 3 songs. We're trying to keep that part short because I knew I'd go a little longer today. So sorry it's hard with kids and son, but let's pray. Let's worship our loving, romancing Lord. Let's take communion together. Heavenly Father, we thank you.